Welcome back to the Bitcoin Treasuries podcast. I'm Tim Kotzman, and I'm here with Bitcoin Pilot. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey Tim, thanks man. Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So I saw your Bitcoin class of 17. I assume that's 2017. And you're the founder and CEO of the Cider Mill Fund. You're a Bitcoin evangelist, an educator. You're a former Marine Corps aviator. And you spent a lot of hours, over 10,000 to be specific, on Bitcoin education. So yeah, super curious to whatever you'd like to share about your background and what kind of how you stumbled onto Bitcoin and the whole journey.
Sure. Yeah. Again, thanks for having me on, Tim. This is awesome. I've watched a few of your episodes, and I saw your debate with I think it was British Hodl and Gladiator, which I think was part of me going to educate him was trying to get him to a point where he really understands Bitcoin a little bit better, because I think he does have an interesting audience. But for my own personal journey, I think that a lot of people come to Bitcoin because they were maybe gold bugs first, or they didn't trust the government first, or they were, came from it from more of like an anarchist perspective and that kind of thing. And I'm not that at all. Bitcoin was the thing that introduced me to all of that. And so for me, I was lucky. I had a good friend of mine who's been in Bitcoin since about 2011, came to visit me, started talking about Bitcoin in the same way that I do today, trying to get in my ear and educate me a little bit about what it was, why it was important. And I didn't know any of the issues that I know now. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners start to learn as they go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And so, yeah, that was 2015. I really wish I'd listened to him in 2015. It took me a little bit longer, about 18 months, to really start to go on my own journey. And so that was in 2017 was when I really started looking into it. And, it's part of why when I do start educating people, my first step is to try to get them to buy Bitcoin, because it wasn't until I started to purchase Bitcoin that I really started to think more deeply about it. Once you have skin in the game, that skin tends to allow you to go further and further down the rabbit hole. And and so for me, there were a few things that kind of got me to that point. I read Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, which he wrote in 2005. But I read that back in 2013. And I think that sort of primed me to understand the parabolic nature of technologies. And he talks in there about sort of this world of abundance that we're going to go into once. And he sort of mentions offhand money as like, we're going to need to perfect money in order for an abundance to take place. I didn't know what that meant, because I didn't know what Bitcoin was, and neither did he when he wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
But he was talking about Bitcoin. He just didn't realize it yet. And I think that's the case for a lot of, if you look back as you read more and more books that are Bitcoin adjacent, or maybe even pre-Bitcoin books that a lot of people go back and read, whether it's Bastiat's The Law, or a book like Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near, you start to see Bitcoin in a lot of places. And so I remember that book as I was starting to learn about Bitcoin. And then I read some of the more Bitcoin actual books, like Internet of Money by Andreas, and Nathaniel Popper's Digital Gold, and then obviously like Safe and things like that as they came on later. Those things all sort of helped me go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And I think my experience as a Marine aviator and as a Marine officer, being in Afghanistan and seeing the problems that were facing a place like Afghanistan, and then learning about the nature of Bitcoin, the borderless nature of Bitcoin, and how it could help in a place like that, made it much easier to sort of understand the use cases for Bitcoin. And I don't think I would have got there as quickly had I not been there. I think it's hard sometimes as Americans and people who live in this country, where we have access to the traditional banking system that we have, whether it's Venmo or Zelle or your own bank account that you're just not worried about, to grasp Bitcoin without seeing it firsthand, what it means to have money that you can control and use without anybody's permission, or at least use it in a way that feels non-permissioned, was really, it allowed me to see that and go, wow, if people in Afghanistan had Bitcoin, that would really change things. And so I think those experiences really led me into Bitcoin in 2017. I went through, like a lot of people, sort of a shitcoining phase, and then through the end of that year, and then from then on, basically really started to go down the rabbit hole. And I had started a fund in 2020 with my brothers, um, where we bought a little bit of Bitcoin and a couple other investments. It's mostly Bitcoin only now. That's the Cider Mill Fund. I came from a more traditional finance background, so like when I was in high school, when I was in college, I was the econ guy. I thought I was going to be in the investment banking world. I thought I was going to be in New York City. I was from New England. That was sort of my background. And to go away from that in the way that I did, and then come back to something that really piqued my interest in the way that investment banking never did, in the way that traditional finance never really did, um, was really kind of a big journey for me to come all the way back. And now we have this tool, this special tool, Bitcoin, that allows me to interact with finance in a way that I'm excited about, uh, and interact with sort of monetary theory and monetary policy in a way that I'm interested in, and therefore very excited to educate other people about.
I can see on your shirt it says "Ask me," and I don't know what the rest of it says about Bitcoin. Okay, how does that go out in public? And like, how long have you been wearing these shirts out in public? I'm assuming you're wearing them in public.
Yes, yeah. No, it's funny. I wear it out when I walk around. Most of the time, I forget I'm wearing it because I wear it so often. And then somebody will stop me and they'll go, "What about Bitcoin?" And then I always look at them twice, like, "Why do you know? Why are you asking me that question?" And I forget I'm wearing the shirt.
Yeah.
I will say recently better than it used to.
Mm.
A bull market tends to do that, right? Number go up, all of a sudden people want to talk about Bitcoin. So I do enjoy wearing it. I wear it to the gym sometimes. I had like an hour and a half long conversation with the guy who runs my gym the other day. And then this other guy came over and he had more real estate background. And it sparked this really interesting conversation. Here's a guy who's convicted about real estate and convicted about the necessity to have that as part of your portfolio. And it gave me a chance to, help him question some of those ideas. Is real estate really the store of value you think it is? Is it going to always go up? Is it the pristine capital that you think it is? Do you really own it if you have to pay property taxes? And you start, as every conversation can become a Bitcoin conversation very quickly. And so I got to have one with him, and he was asking me, as they do, well, do you own a house? Are you thinking about buying? Are you looking at the real estate market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And very quickly realizing that no, I have no interest in the real estate market. I'm not thinking about buying a real estate investment property. I would never do that. And I won't do that because I have Bitcoin. And so it becomes this Bitcoin conversation. And so, yeah, recently it's been a lot more fun. And because I've been doing this for so long, it's fun because people will come up with, they'll try to either stump you or give you a question that they think you can't, understand or whatever. And generally I have an answer because I've been talking about Bitcoin for so freaking long. This guy the other day, I think he was with his wife. He was trying to sound, I don't know what his intention was, but he asked me about the rule of 72, thinking I wasn't going to be able to, keep up with it or whatever. And I was like, well, yeah, the rule of 72 is interesting. Right now the CAGR for Bitcoin is roughly, 50 over the last 7 years. And, you could see him just going, oh no, I don't know. I can't, I don't, I don't know how to answer this question anymore. And so, yeah, it's been fun. I wear the shirt as often as I can. And, it does spark some pretty interesting conversations. And like I said, I even got a client out of it. And ended up talking to this woman who was a billionaire up in not too far from where I live, and she knew nothing about Bitcoin, and I got to sit with her for a couple hours and discuss it, and that was all because I was wearing this "Ask Me About Bitcoin" T-shirt. So as evangelists, we all should be evangelizing as much as possible, and if that means I got to wear a billboard on my chest sometimes, I will go ahead and do that.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by OnRamp. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated, cold storage, multi-sig vault, guarded by 3 independent, institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. To learn more, schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team. Go to www.onrampbitcoin.com. Could you share with us the story of I was just scrolling, I don't know, a month or two ago, and I see you, and I think that was my first introduction really to you, sitting with Gladiator and maybe his parents in their dining room or kitchen, kind of talking about Bitcoin. Did you know him in real life, or how'd you guys get connected? How did all that kind of transpire, and then how did it go? What was your takeaway?
Yeah, that's really funny. Yeah, so I was on a Spaces with Gladiator a couple months ago, and somebody asked a question that was a pretty routine Bitcoin question. And I had been talking for a while, and I didn't really feel like talking anymore. And I was like, "Hey, Gladiator, why don't you answer this question?" And he started to answer it, and his answer, made it very clear that he didn't understand the underlying protocol of Bitcoin. He couldn't explain the thing that we were talking about. I think we were just talking about transactions and how they work. And he couldn't understand the fee. He didn't know how to explain the fee structure. He didn't understand the mempool. And so it just kind of fell apart very quickly. And I kind of stopped him and I said, "Gladiator, you have no idea what you're talking about, do you?" And he kind of laughed, and I was like, "All right, we got to fix that." And he had been tweeting about golf. He's an excellent golfer, and I golf a little bit. I'm not very good, but I play, and I've played quite a bit. And I said, "All right, how about this? You pick a golf course. We'll meet up. We'll play golf, and then afterwards, I'll come over and we'll put you in some cold storage. We'll talk about Bitcoin, and we'll kind of go from there." And so I went up. We played a round of golf. He is legitimately he's a plus handicap. He's an incredible golfer. He is he showed up kind of flustered, 10 minutes late, walked up to the tee, kind of threw his bag on the ground, drove the ball right down the middle, walks up. He's tweeting the whole time while he's walking up the fairway, walks up to his ball, hits the ball to 5 feet, knocks the putt in for birdie, and walks off the second hole. And I was like, "Oh, wow. Okay. So this guy, he can play." And I think he shot like 2 over, barely paying attention to golf the whole time. We were talking about Bitcoin, we were talking about MSTR. And then he was, he was kind enough to invite me over to his house, his parents' basement. And we sat down, and we thought it was going to be maybe like an hour or so. And it ended up being, it was myself, Gladiator, and his parents. Both his parents sat around their kitchen table for 5 hours. And we talked about Bitcoin. I answered every question I had. And, Gladiator's father is a successful entrepreneur / finance guy, traditional finance analyst world kind of thing. I think he actually knows my uncle, who used to be in the traditional finance world. And we ended up having great conversations, and he asked some very poignant questions. And so how that went, I wanted to share that because I think his mom posted a couple videos, but this is a 5-hour conversation. I think she posted like 2 or 3 videos of what we were talking about, and it's the first time I've sat down with like a whole family in that way, different generations, which in different experience levels. So everybody's kind of coming at it from different questions, different asks, and different knowledge levels. And I would say the knowledge level of Bitcoin particularly was pretty low, but their conviction in Bitcoin and what kind of fascinated me about Gladiator in the first place is like his conviction in MSTR is really outsized, and his parents' conviction in Bitcoin, and not necessarily, I think I forget, I'm not trying to share their portfolio, but their conviction in Bitcoin was really outsized compared to how much knowledge they had about what Bitcoin actually was. And so it was really lovely for me. I got to spend all this time sitting there and talking and explaining from first principles and from from the beginning of what Satoshi was trying to do and the history of money. And, we went, I did the whole thing. I was talking about rye stones and agri beads and the Medici family and the invention of double entry bookkeeping. And now either triple entry or virtual entry bookkeeping, whatever you want to call Bitcoin. And they kept coming up with more and more questions, but it was supposed to be a cold storage demo, right? I had bought a cold card queue. I brought it up for him and I was like, here's how it's going to happen. But I realized that was like kind of too far, too much advanced from where they were. And I thought it was a better idea to just let's all get, I ended up using Blockstream's Green Wallet. So I just had them all download Blockstream's Green Wallet. And we just went like, okay, let's all get a seed phrase. Everybody write it down. And then I'm going to send you $100 worth of Bitcoin. We'll send it around the room. Some people, and I've done this a few times since then, some people are like, oh, that's cool. It just feels like Venmo to them, right? Or it just feels like, Cash App. There's nothing particularly special. But they all seem to really grasp why it was different. And I think there were sort of these light bulb moments of like, oh, wow, like we just did that without giving anybody any information, without having to share my name or my social security number or my bank account information or anything else that you would normally have to do. And we were able to transact value without permission in a real way. And so it's something that I recommend to people who are trying to orange pill is it doesn't work all the time, but I have had a lot of success with showing people actually, and whether it's Blue Wallet or Green Wallet or any of your other, self-custodial or self-custodial Bitcoin apps, you don't have to necessarily get yourself a cold card. You don't necessarily have to have a Trezor or some other hardware device. Just showing somebody the process and making sure you have enough time. Because the other problem with Bitcoin is like everybody wants it to be, we talk about Bitcoin should be so easy your grandmother can use it. And like that's fine. But in order to use real Bitcoin, like it's not that it's never going to be that easy. If you really want to use Bitcoin, I don't care how many how many VCs get involved. I don't care how many, technologists get involved. Like in the end, you have to create a seed phrase. You have to store that seed phrase. You have to take custody of your own Bitcoin. You have to learn how to send and receive. And those things are more complicated than what people are normally used to. And so you got to have some time and you got to be able to sit down and do it. That being said, being able to sit down with them and showing them, having Gladiator send some to his mom, send it to his dad, send it back to Gladiator, send it to me, and showing how easy it really is. Like it's not complicated, it's not difficult. It's just takes a little more time than normal. But once you have that moment, that sort of epiphany moment of like, wow, this is different and this is special. It was really a great conversation because of that and watching them get it at a different level and then having these different talks about why is this special? What is different about this? What does it matter? And you just got to go to where they live, right? So some people come at it from a traditional finance perspective. Some people come at it have no idea. Some people come at it because it's a technology that's interesting. Some people come at it because number go up, and you just have to find your different ways to look at it, and then kind of talk to them about why it's special. And I have a million analogies that I've used over the past, but I want to share one. If you don't mind, I'll share the one that I like to share that I share with them, and that I like to share with people in general. That I think sometimes really kind of hammers home why Bitcoin, not just, why the number is going to go up or why you can keep your own coins or any of that kind of thing. It's why we need it as a replacement of a system that is fundamentally broken. And so I come from a family of architects. My mom was an architect. I have two brothers, that are architects. And I like to use kind of the idea of building buildings as an analog for Bitcoin. And so like right now, if you want to build a building, you have to have an agreed upon unit of measurement, right? So like the world we live in exists because an inch is an inch or a meter is a meter, or a foot is a foot around the world. And so when my brother sits down and as an architect and designs a building, or my other brother who's a landscape architect and he works on a park or comes up with some new outdoor space, he's designing that based on the fact that an inch is an inch, regardless of what happens tomorrow, the next day, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now. And so they sit down, they make those plans out, and then they hand that off to an engineer. An engineer looks at it and sees the feasibility and makes some changes if things literally won't be able to stand up because of the mathematics and the physics that go into that. And they make their changes. But again, it's all made in a single unit of measurement. And then that gets held off to a construction company or a contractor, and he looks at the plans. And because an inch is an inch, he doesn't have to, go check with some central authority to see what an inch is today. It's always the same. And so I go into these spaces where people are talking about, what the IMF is doing and what the Fed is going to do next week, and how the president's tariffs affect the dollar, and what EBITDA for a company might be, or any number, or people arguing about MMT, or Keynesians arguing about why war is good for us. And all these conversations get muddied because our unit of measurement changes every day, right? And so, like, the world we build, the economy we build is built on this shifting, crappy unit of measurement that fluctuates given different interest rates, what country is printing, what country is at war, what central authority decides the changes tomorrow, the fluctuations of the stock market, any number of things. And that is all on this bed of sand that is eroding underneath us because the dollar doesn't have a single $1 equals $1. $1 equals something today. It equals something different tomorrow. It equals something different 5 minutes from now. And I think that is why you see so much chaos in our economic system. And so if as we move towards a Bitcoin standard, when right now one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, but when a whole society is built on that idea of one Bitcoin being one Bitcoin, it's just like an architect who's building using 1 inch equals 1 inch. Now we can have economists, or we can have an economy, or we can have interactions of different individuals in free markets built on the fact that one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, and that will be true not just tomorrow, but 10,000 years from now. Uh, and so, I've used that example a few times. I really think that is a powerful way to look at why Bitcoin is so important as a fundamental change, rather than just, oh, it's a new technology, it's a new investment, it's a new measurement, whatever it might be. Like, that is the fundamental difference. And so, as a Bitcoin evangelist and as a Bitcoin educator, I try to let people know, because a lot of people come to Bitcoin, probably myself included. I come because, oh, it's going to be this massive growth and I can make a bunch of money and that'll be great. But you shift at some point to a place where what I want is that future that I see, the one that will last for 10,000 years, is the future that I Bitcoin pilot, want to see today. Like, I only got so many more years. We only got so many years on this planet, right? Everybody's only got so many years. I want to see as much of that future as possible. And so, as an evangelist, the reason that I'm so passionate, the reason that I wear a Bitcoin t-shirt, the reason that I try to educate as much as I can, and I've got no audience, but even if I can get one more person on board, I can help pull that future that I see here as quickly as possible. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners, when Bitcoiners get in trouble for being maximalists or being toxic, I think it comes from a place of love. Like, I think on my bio, I've got, when I say buy Bitcoin, what I really mean is I love you. Like, that is, if I'm telling you to buy Bitcoin, it's because I want you to share in this beautiful future that I see. And we get these small glimpses of every once in a while. But I really want to pull that future forward as quickly as humanly possible. And so, yeah. And so the reason I reached out, and the reason that I was so excited to get to talk to somebody like Gladiator, is because, as a young guy, he's early in his Bitcoin journey. But he's got an audience, he's got people who are listening to him, and he should be coming from it, from first principles. he should be talking about MicroStrategy from a place where he feels confident about what Bitcoin is. And so, yeah, I got to sit down. I got to talk to him that whole time. We still text every once in a while. I give him a lot of crap because he makes some pretty outrageous statements that I really think are. I hope he keeps learning. We all get there eventually on our own journey. And so I hope that he continues to learn. I hope he continues to go down that rabbit hole. And I think that he is, but he's a young guy. And I think it's super important that young people are learning this stuff um, early on. I wish I had been able to learn when his age and really grasp this from an early perspective. But uh, I think it's also really important to tell people and make them understand that how early we really are.
The Bitcoin for Corporations Conference is coming to Orlando May 6th and 7th. Receive 20% off admission by going to microstrategy.com, selecting Bitcoin for Corporations, and using discount code KOTZ at checkout, and I'll see you there. Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Stampseed. If you're in cold storage, you know how important it is to protect your seed phrase. That's why I recommend you head over to stampseed.com and check it out for yourself. This seed phrase storage device is one solid piece of titanium. There are no loose pieces, and you can hammer your seed phrase in letter by letter. When you go to stampseed.com, use promo code TIM15 for a 15% discount across the website. That's TIM15. Maybe it depends on the audience, but do you have a way of approaching things or a view on whether it's maybe by and large better to be like Natalie Brunell is a self-proclaimed like non-toxic maximalist versus some of the, well, I don't know if they're toxic or not, but some of the maximalists over the weekend, right? They're like on social media saying that they're going to be like physically sick when they see like about the crypto reserve. And then like all different personalities, right? Gladiator being very enthusiastic about MSTR, I guess we could say.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Any thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I come from the perspective of like Bitcoin doesn't need any of us, right? Like Bitcoin, it's a wonderful system because it's voluntary. Like so nobody gets forced into Bitcoin. And that includes nation states, that includes corporations, that includes individuals. I really do think Bitcoin is this bottom up revolution. I don't really believe that the SBR. I put it less than a 10% chance that the SBR works out in the way that people think it's going to. I think Bitcoin continues to be, like I said, a bottom up revolution, company by company at this point, which is really exciting. Small nation state by small nation state. Maybe the U.S. figures out a way to dip their toes in it. But if you're talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve that needs to be voted on by the House and the Senate and passed as like legislation, I just don't think there's any chance that the Bitcoin strategic reserve is going to come through in that way. Now, if Trump can figure out a way to do it using an executive order, maybe. But does that count as a stockpile or a reserve if next election cycle somebody can come in and cancel all that? I don't know. I reserve judgment on that stuff for a very long time. I personally subscribe to being a toxic maximalist, and I mean, it's so important to really tell people from the beginning the difference between Bitcoin and these other things. And I don't know how you do that without being a bit toxic. Mm-hmm. The people out there who allow for the apologizing of the word crypto and say there are use cases for these other things. I say that from my own personal perspective because my good friend, when I was first started learning Bitcoin, he was saying that to me. He was like, because back then it was Litecoin, it was Ethereum. Those were like the three things available on Coinbase at the time. And so of course I'm like, oh, okay, this is a basket of new things. Like I'll buy some of this other stuff. And my buddy was like, what are you doing? Like, don't waste your time with that. Like, just like we've already learned this lesson. Like that stuff is all worthless. It's all going to zero and priced in Bitcoin. Like just get away from it. And I didn't listen until later. But But I will say, when I did come to that realization, I could come back to him and realize that he had this sort of uh, unimpeachable integrity. And I think Bitcoiners should come to it from that perspective of like, I want to have unimpeachable integrity when it comes to Bitcoin and evangelizing Bitcoin. And if that comes off as toxic, well, I'm okay with that, because if you don't, then you won't be there to call out the people who start apologizing and then eventually become these shillers of other things. I think Fred Krueger is a really good example of that this year. Fred kind of came out of nowhere and grew up and got really big. And I think he still says BTC Maxi in his profile, but now every one of his spaces is like selling meme coins on Solana, and like that needs to be called out. It needs to be called out violently. I mean, not actually violently, but needs to be called out, vehemently, against allowing new people to see that and say, yeah, okay, this is a good place to go. This is a good way to go. And so, the thing I love about Bitcoin is, like I said, it's a voluntary system. And so there are going to be people who come at it from a very welcoming place where everybody can come in and kumbaya and talk about it. And then there are other people who will come in and call out stuff immediately and as vehemently as they possibly can. Uh, you know, and the thing I love about Bitcoin is there are no heroes. For me, Andreas Antonopoulos was a huge uh, somebody who really kind of understood it as much as anyone can early on. His books were the first things that really got me into Bitcoin. I was listening to him talk about Bitcoin. I found his takes to be incredibly prescient, and they continue to be things that I push people towards. But of course, as soon as he wrote Mastering Ethereum, the whole place turned on him, and there are no heroes in this world, right? And I think Saylor is people are very wary of what he's doing because he's using words like digital assets and crypto and not as much Bitcoin. Does he deserve that? No, probably not. The guy has bought 500,000 Bitcoin at this point. I think he's proven his bona fides for being a Bitcoin maxi. But there are no heroes, and there are no sacred cows other than Bitcoin for Bitcoiners. And so yeah, I do sort of think that it's important to be um, vehement in your views, because Bitcoin is not just uh, it's not just a place where you're going to park your money. It's not just, oh, this is a better store of value. It's not just, oh, this is a monetary system. For a lot of Bitcoiners, it's philosophical, and for a lot of Bitcoiners, it's spiritual. It's about changing the world, not just changing your own life, which it has for a lot of Bitcoiners, right? A lot of Bitcoiners have gotten very wealthy. They've been able to leave their jobs or change their lives, or I know plenty of Bitcoiners who aren't psychopaths and don't talk about Bitcoin all day, but they've got plenty of Bitcoin and they're just living their lives. Uh, which is one of the spectacular things about Bitcoin. I mean, a friend of mine talked about this years ago about how crypto, or Bitcoin specifically, has for the first time ever made it possible to be just sort of a silent billionaire, or just be an unknown billionaire. In order to be a billionaire in the past, you had to start a company and be the face of something, and be a CEO, be on a board, or be some well-known investor or whatever. There are number of billionaires in the world right now who just found Bitcoin in 2010 and just bought a bunch and never talked about it, and and off they go, and they live their lives that way. But why that's so special is because it allows you to interact with Bitcoin in any way that you see fit. And in the long run, what I think it really does, though, is it changes people's changes the way that people interact with money, but then it also changes the way you interact with other people. And it's something that you can kind of talk about a little bit, but you really have to experience as a Bitcoiner. I just went to El Salvador for the first time a couple weeks ago, and I got to see sort of that world that I was talking about earlier, that I want to pull forward, right? I bought beer and my hotel room and, surfboard lessons, all paying with sats using Lightning. And so you come into these spaces and you hear these people arguing about Lightning Network and layer twos, and it's not ready yet, and we're not there. And it's like, it is. It's just not adopted yet. And getting to go there and see that world and see and again, that's just the way you interact with it, right? But it fundamentally changes the way that you interact with other people uh, in a way that's hard to describe. It makes you more optimistic, and therefore it makes you more generous. When you realize that your money is going to go up in value, when you realize that your store of value is going to continue to grow, it changes the way you look at the future. It changes your time preference. It changes the way that you interact with others. I'll give you an example. This is a little bit, but a friend of mine who was another friend of mine who was early adopter of Bitcoin was selling, you know, fun things on Silk Road, put it that way. And he had been selling those fun things in the regular world using cash beforehand. So he had been selling it using Bitcoin on Silk Road, and he'd been selling it in cash beforehand. I wasn't part of this at the time. I was a Marine Corps officer, so this wasn't really my world. I didn't know anything about any Silk Road or any of that stuff. But the way that he describes the difference in his life from a world in which he was dealing with paper fiat cash to a world in which he was dealing with mostly Bitcoin, uh, it went from this world of scarcity where things had to be dealt with quickly and effectively. There was more fear based around the business that he was running, more fear based around the people that he was dealing with, to a Bitcoin world where if similar problems came up, there wasn't the same sort of animosity or antagonism between the parties that were dealing with it. And so, and that was something that he had said to me, but it didn't really come into play until I started using Bitcoin, not to buy anything illegal or anything like that, but I've used Bitcoin here and there, like I said, in El Salvador. And I have friends up here. Like I recently bought Svetsky's new book from a buddy of mine, The Bushido of Bitcoin. And I paid in Bitcoin, and we utilize Bitcoin, locally as much as we can. I just bought a cold card queue case using some Bitcoin, and there's less haggling, I will say. Like there's less sort of consternation over prices of things. Um, it's a more it's a more sort of like I said, it's a more optimistic way of interacting with people. And so when the conversation starts, when the value conversation starts with a money like Bitcoin versus one that is built on exploitation, it's it's like a subconscious change in the way that you feel about that change of value, about that transit of value. Um, it's sort of like, I don't know if you've ever been on vacation to a place where you feel like everybody's trying to get a tip, or everybody's trying to get some money from you. Like you walk into the hotel and like everybody's got their hand out. Everybody's sort of, it feels like this desperation to kind of squeeze as much out of you when you're in those places.
That's New York
Versus,
City every day. That's New York City every day.
yeah, right. New York City is the perfect example. Right.
Yeah.
I went to, as a pilot, I've traveled all over the world and all over the country. I was in Jamaica not too long ago, and Jamaica is a very poor and desperate place. And you can feel that sense of like, I need to get everything out of you as much as I possibly can, as quickly as I can. Whether you're taking a taxi or you're buying a coconut, like it's just sort of this feeling of like, I got to get that money. I got to get that money. When I went to El Salvador, totally different experience, complete opposite. Uh, Land in El Salvador, my Spanish is garbage. I go to get a taxi cab, and you know, if you in Jamaica, and actually in Mexico not too long ago, you get out there to the taxi line, and like there's five people fighting over you and trying to get your money, and hey, I got the best deal. Come with me. Let me grab your bag. I get to El Salvador, and like five guys kind of look at each other like, "Do you want this one? Do you want to take it? Do you?" And I don't even think they're necessarily dealing in Bitcoin, but I think it is starting to Bitcoin permeates itself into a culture regardless of whether everybody's using Bitcoin or not. Um, but this particular guy did pay in Bitcoin, and so he was it was very calm. They kind of decided like, yeah, you want to, yeah, okay, you go ahead, you take it. He grabbed my bag. I used the restroom. It was, I never, it all felt very safe and very, cordial. And then off we went. I paid him in sats when I got to the hotel, and it was a night and day difference. I haven't been there long enough. But that was a very striking difference between my experience when I was in Jamaica and my experience when I was in El Salvador. And I have to imagine some part of that is the Bitcoin sort of impermeating itself into the culture. And I think that anybody who has used Bitcoin in a real way, to make interactions and to transition value from one person to another will have a similar experience. And I certainly have had that similar experience. Another example, this was back in kind of the altcoin, phase of my journey. But I remember we were God, what was it called? Oh, Bitcoin Rhodium. I don't know if you ever heard of that or remember that. Uh, it was one of these forks of Bitcoin, and you could get it by holding amount of Bitcoin in a wallet for a couple days, and they marked you as having X amount of Bitcoin in your wallet, and they would issue you Bitcoin Rhodium. Bitcoin Rhodium went to zero. That's really not part of the story here. But with a few of my friends, we're like, yeah, we might as well. We'll just hold it in an address. They'll mark it, and then we'll send it back to you. And I think, this was early days, but I think we had a group of like 15 guys, and they probably sent, what today would be worth millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And they sent it to me, and I held it them for a couple days, and then I sent it back. And it's like, that's a very interesting
Hmm.
world to live in, where you have Bitcoiners that have sort of there's an inherent trust between you. I'm not telling anybody to send your Bitcoin to people you don't know, by the way. This is not a good idea. But there was something special about that. I remember when I finished it, I took all the Bitcoin in for a couple of days and I sent it all back to everybody. All we did was pay the transaction fees. But I remember talking to one of them afterwards. I was like, that's wild what just happened, right? We're talking about an asset that we think is going to be worth millions of dollars, probably $10 million in our lifetime. And this level of trust and inherent sort of uh, belief in something and belief in each other that exists in the system, because I'm not trying to scam anybody else out of their Bitcoin, because I don't need it. I have my coin, and I know that's going to go up in value. I don't need to scam or take advantage of somebody else in order to accrue that value. And in fact, the more people that you get involved in it and the more trust that we can build in this system, the bigger the system will grow, and the more benefit we all will have. Um, and that is a fun. It's a beautiful thing. Uh, to kind of hammer that point is like, I don't get paid. I've gotten paid a little bit to teach people about Bitcoin, but only recently, right? Only really this year have I started accepting money for Bitcoin, and I do that because, sorry, accepting money for education on Bitcoin, and I do that because it changes the conversation. It puts skin in the game for the people who are doing it. I used to do this. I've tried to orange pill hundreds of people. Um, but when somebody actually pays for your time, it changes the conversation, and I enjoy that a lot more now, because I did give away a lot of my time over the years to people who didn't really want the information, didn't care, didn't understand why it was important, and most of those people have either moved on or never got it or never bought any Bitcoin. So, for the first time ever, I'm accepting money for educating people on Bitcoin. But before that, there's no, and even that is nothing compared to what I used to make as a pilot or anything else that I've been doing. It's more about getting somebody to be fully engaged in the conversation rather than me making a bunch of money off of educating people on Bitcoin. But people would look at the amount of time I've spent trying to tell people and teach people about Bitcoin, and they would say, why would you do this? What benefit do you get out of it? People can't understand getting essentially quote unquote nothing out of spending your time with somebody to educate them on Bitcoin and to educate them on anything for that matter, right? Like we live in a world where everybody's trying to get something out of every interaction. And what's great about Bitcoin is what I get out of it is that first of all, it helps me protect the people I love, right? So if you're going to buy some Bitcoin, that's my way of helping you protect yourself from this fiat world that we live in. But also, inherently, it does benefit me because every person that adopts it makes the network bigger and makes the network stronger, and eventually makes number go up. And so, I think I've certainly become. I know I am. I was when I used to work when I was in the Marine Corps. I think a lot of my fellow pilots thought I'd lost my mind because we would. I was a C-130 pilot, right? And C-130s are great. It's an awesome platform, super fun. I've flown all over the world. I've flown combat missions in Afghanistan. I've been through the Philippines and Japan and all through Europe and the rest of the world. But in that time comes a lot of downtime. A lot of times in the cockpit with another pilot and maybe a crewmaster or two, where you end up talking about a lot of nothing. And so I definitely became the Bitcoin pilot at that point. I was the guy that everybody was like, I think John's lost his mind, but I think he's lost his mind. But that was just who I was, and that's who I became. And I'm totally okay with that. And then my family, they all love me, but I think they thought I've lost my mind too. But they all own some Bitcoin. And I don't care if they think I lost my mind because they are slightly more protected than they were had they not bought some Bitcoin. And I really enjoy that. And this bull market has been fun. The bull markets are always fun for me. I know people, talk about how bear markets are great because they did so much building. I think that's always the funny conversation of like, oh, we were building so much in the bear market. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Sure you were. Nobody was listening though, so who cares? And now these bull markets come around and you start to get, people start to listen again. People want to engage in the conversation. This last mark from 100, 108 down to 78, of course, the guys who come out, the guys love coming out and telling you were wrong. And I get to go, okay, yeah, we'll see. But it has been a fun year, and it always brings forward these kind of conversations, which I think is awesome. I think this show is a bull market creation, correct? Like you started it. How long ago did you guys start?
Yeah, October. So yeah.
Yeah,
October.
Right. And so like
October.
Yeah. So here comes the Tim Kotzman show, right? The Bitcoin Treasuries podcast, and it gives you that spark of hope. And because we live in a simulation, I'm pretty sure we're going to 420K, right? We were at 69K last cycle. We're going to 420K this cycle. Put it in the book, write it down. Bitcoin Pilot says 420K in 2025. And it's going to be a hell of a ride. It's going to be super fun. And I can't wait. I've just been having a blast, and I'm going to continue to enjoy it as much as I possibly can.
Absolutely. We have a few minutes left. Outside of the pilots and I'm blanking on what the other thing is. I guess, family, social media. What does real life look like for you as far as, are there local Bitcoin meetups that you go to? Do you go to any events, whether it's like a more corporate focus or like the bigger Bitcoin conferences here or abroad, or I guess what level of activity and engagement do you kind of find yourself in?
Yeah, so I mostly stay local. So we have a really nice, where I live, we have a pretty good, there's a smattering of Bitcoin meetups. I think there's now 4 different Bitcoin meetups within driving distance for me. And I'm in communication with and friends with everybody who runs and hosts those. There's one in particular that's been run basically, I think once a month, every month since 2015.
Oh, wow.
And they've never missed one. And it's really pretty remarkable in this, because I used to live up in San Francisco Bay Area. Up there, it was the Plug and Play meetup, which was, I think, the very first Bitcoin meetup. It was Roger Vere's Bitcoin meetup back before he, turned into Bitcoin Cash. and that was my first introduction. Being up in San Francisco in 2017 was awesome because there were a ton of places to go and educate and all that stuff. Where I am now, like I said, there's a lot of action. There's a meetup almost every week. There's at least one. That those have been fundamental for me because they allow me to interact with people, and then every Tuesday night, almost every Tuesday night, I host a Zoom call with local Bitcoiners. We talk about MSTR. I've been educating people about options because it's something that I think we as Bitcoiners should continue to educate ourselves in every facet of finance. And so I teach a class on options. We have a small group that we are sort of crowdsourcing shareholder proposals. So we took a page out of the playbook of the guys who were doing Microsoft's shareholder proposal, and we started putting in shareholder proposals for next year. So look out for us to be putting a lot of those into every company that we qualify for. And actually, I mean, if we got a second. Something that your audience can do. This is something that any Bitcoiner could do. If you qualify or somebody qualifies for submitting a shareholder proposal, which generally what it is you have to own, I think it's $25,000 worth of a stock for 1 year, $15,000 worth of stock, no, $10,000 worth of stock, I think, for 2 years, or $2,000 worth of stock over the course of 3 years. So if you meet one of those for a publicly traded company, any publicly traded company, you can submit a shareholder proposal. So you have to go to your brokerage and get a letter from them that proves that you owned a certain amount of stock for a certain amount of time. And then you could submit a shareholder proposal. You go to the investor relations page for one of your companies. You ask them about how to do it. Some companies are really good about educating you and showing you how to do it. Some are really obtuse, and they just give you an 80-page document. They're like, it's in there, go figure it out. But I think that that's something that we as Bitcoiners could do this year, is really try to get a shareholder proposal in front of every publicly traded company. Whether they actually get the Bitcoin onto their books or not is really besides the point. I think it's as with this Microsoft thing, right? Some Bitcoiner went ahead and got it on Microsoft's desk. They denied it with great prejudice. I think it was like 99.4% of the voters said no. But that is something we now get to point to in 10 years or 5 years and say, well, if you adopted Bitcoin, this is what you would have done. So why not do it for every publicly traded company we can? So I've been leading a bit of a charge with some local Bitcoiners to try to get those shareholder proposals out there for 2026. So that's something that's something, like I said, every Bitcoiner can do. Whether you own whether you own stock or not, you may have a brother or a parent or a friend or somebody who does and is willing to kind of go in on that with you. And so that's been something that I've been doing as an evangelist in my local area. And through that, I've met a lot of new Bitcoiners. Like I said, I met a woman who turned out to be friends with a billionaire, and I went and spoke with her about Bitcoin and got her sort of educated. And she's been talking to me now about making an allocation. And of course, then she talks to her friends, and then the ball keeps rolling, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Number go up is our biggest friend, right? Like nobody is going to have this conversation when Bitcoin goes down 70%. So you gotta make hay when you can, right? You gotta garden as much as you possibly can while people are paying attention. And so I'm continuing to do that. And if you're not, like, if somebody in your audience is not doing that, my recommendation is, post a meetup, get something going in your local area. There's no reason that you can't have a couple people meet up at a local coffee shop to talk Bitcoin. There's Bitcoiners everywhere now. If you're not involved yourself, you can start one. If you haven't gone to one, I highly recommend you do. Meeting local Bitcoiners is a fantastic way to continue your own journey and get even further down in that level of conviction, so that when the bear market does come, you got other people to rely on. I think it's a huge benefit to have somebody else you can talk to when Bitcoin is doing what Bitcoin does.
Absolutely. Where can people find you on social media and or elsewhere to talk about Bitcoin, shareholder proposals, and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm on Twitter as Bitcoin Pilot. if you go into my if you want to be educated, you want to learn, I teach all this stuff, whether you want to know how to start a node or get multi-sig going, or just you're trying to learn about cold storage. I'm part of the Bitcoin mentor team with BTC sessions. So you can either find me through his website, or you can find me. My link is on my Bitcoin Twitter page. You can find me there, and you can sit down with me for a 15-minute free information session. We can talk about what you're trying to do. I've been doing this for a long time, and if I don't know the answer, I certainly can find out. So I'm like I said, I just enjoy this stuff. I love talking about Bitcoin. I love educating people. It's my passion. And yeah, you can find me on Bitcoin Twitter. Hit me up. My messages are open. You can find me there for sure. I'm on Spaces quite a bit talking about this stuff. And I'd love to interact with anybody who's genuinely curious about Bitcoin.
Awesome. Well, I have at least 3 questions still like in the front of my mind that I would love to ask you. So
Awesome.
I hope we can have you back from time to time, and
For sure.
really, really appreciate the opportunity to sit down today.
Yeah, maybe you can get George Bodine and I on a conversation. We'll talk a little aviation. He was a Blue Angel guy. In fact, and then Eric Voskel. I don't know if you've had him on your channel yet, but he's a former Navy pilot as well, another Bitcoiner. So maybe we'll do like we'll do a Bitcoin pilot roundtable or something like that.
That would be awesome. Let's do it.
All right, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, man. Take it easy.
You too.